I recently saw the latest film from Osgood Perkins, The Monkey, and I want to talk about this one with you guys, so let's get into it.
Whoever controls it controls life and death. And those deaths are really fucked up.
So I might have been quite foolishly really excited for this movie. After Osgood Perkins directed Longlegs, which I like significantly a lot more than what many people do. In fact, it was one of my favorite movies of last year. I was incredibly impressed with his direction, and because of that, I instantly became very attached and attentive to the types of films that he was going to make in the future. The Monkey is the first film he's made since Longlegs, with quite a quick turnaround, and naturally, I was just really excited to see how Osgood Perkins was going to take a fairly goofy concept and turn it into something of his own. And while I do think he does that, I feel like this film is much more flawed, a lot less enjoyable, and ultimately a very silly and dumb movie that just did not live up to the expectations that I may have unfairly placed on it. Its premise is fairly goofy on paper. It's practically about this cursed monkey toy that every time it smacks a drum, someone dies in very horrific and gruesome ways. And it is pretty much a horror comedy, so it is very silly overall in tone, which I don't mind, and sometimes it actually worked really well, especially one moment near the very end of the movie, which you might have seen as something pretty stupid and silly, but I just loved for just how goofy it was in such a gruesome horror movie at times. I think whenever there is a kill, they're very bloody, very full on, very graphic, and I think it serves the movie extremely well. But this is based off a short story from Stephen King, and I feel like the narrative as a whole has many issues as a movie, such as it doesn't really have the substance to sustain a feature film runtime. I felt like this is the type of movie that would have been a really fun short movie, but when you stretch it out to a feature film runtime, it runs out of steam after about an hour. There are certain gags and the way that the film progresses, you are invested enough for about the first half of it. You're following these kids that absolutely despise each other, these two brothers, and seeing how that relationship evolves as they get older and some certain mysteries behind that as they become estranged is interesting enough. It's enough to keep you going. And you're getting enough kills and this real dry humor that I quite like. There's some great applications of editing that work with the humor. A lot of technical crafts that I think are brilliant and show that Osgood Perkins is a filmmaker that knows what he's doing. But once we passed that halfway point, I felt like I'd seen everything I needed to see, and I just became bored with how dumb it was. Like, this is a Final Destination type of movie. You're just waiting for that person to die. You know they're gonna die. It's how they're going to die that is getting you invested. And I feel like as the film progresses, there becomes less and less frequency of these things, and it focuses a lot more on a narrative and certain arcs that I don't think were interesting at all, if I'm being honest with you. Like the relationship of one of these kids as he's older, he's now a father, and he isn't the best dad, and how that relationship has become so fractured over the course of the movie. I also think the performances around the board are okay to pretty bad at some points. I think Theo James is okay in the lead role, but I do think there was potential for a lot more and a much more better and nuanced performance that I think would make this film a lot more interesting throughout its runtime. He's playing dual roles here, and I think he plays both sides fairly well. I think the evil, more goofy villain type that he's playing, I think that works quite well, and I think in terms of that comedy, he's able to pull it off. But when we get into the more serious, dramatic moments, he just doesn't have what it takes in this movie, I think, to really grip me and get me invested in these characters like it wants me to. And just as this movie kept going on, I kept getting more and more frustrated as I was just like, really, this is all it has to offer? It just doesn't really move on from what it sets up in its first act, and because of that, that is why I'm saying it would work better as a short movie, because it's just a goofy premise with nothing else. And when you have that, it becomes pretty boring when the deaths happen later in the movie because there's just no stakes. I just don't care, and found myself getting very bored and frustrated with it as it kept going, which was a shame because you can see some potential there. There's no doubt that Osgood Perkins is a talented filmmaker, but I felt like a lot of the suspense and things that really served a film like Longlegs could have worked to the benefit of the monkey, but he doesn't do it enough to make it interesting, to make these kills feel dramatic, theatrical, even funnier and more tense, and really serve that horror comedy genre to the absolute fullest. It just doesn't do that enough. And to be honest, as it was over, I just felt like this was a film that I'm ultimately just going to forget about. As a whole, The Monkey is unfortunately quite a frustrating experience with characters I just couldn't really care about enough, especially as it moved on. The performances didn't do enough for me to grip me. The screenplay is fairly lackluster. And that just all hurts a film that could have been really fun, and you can see the moments where that works. And I think the first act is when this film's at its absolute best with that horror comedy genre. But from there, it just runs out of steam so fast and becomes a pretty forgettable horror movie overall. As a score, I'm going to give The Monkey a 2.5 out of 5 because I do think this film is very average. And those are my thoughts towards The Monkey. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. And if you've read the short story by Stephen King, I want to know what you think of that story and if it's any better than what this film presents. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.